The longer you avoid your problems, the more you lose your mind. And we see that in the Bob's Burgers episode, The Crawl Space, where Bob is dealing with a problem that he just keeps running away from. So the episode starts off with the Belchers hanging out in the dining room, and already it seems that Bob is in a bit of a bad mood. Well, that's because his in-laws are coming over, and he's not too happy about it. I feel you, Bob. Linda is freaking out and going into a crazy cleaning frenzy because her parents are coming over, and well, because she and Bob knows exactly how painful they could be. So Bob needs to fix the leak in the ceiling before they get there so, you know, they don't say anything rude about it. So he goes up to the attic and tries to find the problem and fix it. We find out a little more about the reason he hates Linda's mom, his mother-in-law, telling Luis it's mainly because of the noises she makes and the things that she says. So while Bob is in the attic, he discovers a small crawl space that runs between the rooms of the house. Curious, he crawls inside to check it out. While Bob is still in the crawl space, his in-laws arrive. As soon as his mother-in-law steps inside, she starts complaining about the house. She notices pots on the floor and asks why they're there. The pots are there because they're catching water from the leak in the ceiling, but she doesn't wait for an answer before criticizing the mess. Bob, still in the crawl space, listens to her complaints and gets more and more annoyed. He can't really respond or defend himself, so he just sits there, frustrated and trapped in his own house. Linda calls out to Bob, telling him to get out of the crawl space before he gets stuck. But instead of listening, Bob gets an idea. What if he pretends to be stuck? That way, he doesn't have to spend any time with his mother-in-law. The thought of it makes him pretty happy. His mother-in-law, however, isn't buying it. She jokes that Bob couldn't be possibly stuck inside the wall because he's just too big to fit inside. Meanwhile, Bob's father-in-law is not paying too much attention and just walks up to the wall and says, "I want to order a burger."
I'd like to order a hamburger.
Before Bob can say anything though, his mother-in-law snaps at him, saying he can't have a burger, only turkey burgers. Annoyed at it, Bob finally speaks up from inside the wall, saying there's no such thing as turkey burgers. So now we come to the problem Bob is facing and running away from, which is his mother-in-law. He finds her annoying, rude, and just a straight up nagger. Instead of dealing with his frustration, Bob chooses to hide away in the crawl space to avoid confrontation. Sometimes when people face problems they don't want to deal with, they try to run away or hide from them. It could be avoiding an argument, not facing something they're afraid of, or just not wanting to deal with difficult emotions. People might skip work to avoid a tough project, cancel plans to avoid an uncomfortable conversation, or even ignore a problem until it goes away. But the thing is, these problems just don't disappear. They often just get bigger the longer you avoid them. In Bob's case, he's avoiding his mother-in-law because he doesn't want to deal with how annoying and critical she can be. But avoiding the problem doesn't make it go away. It only makes things worse for him and his family. And we'll find a little bit more about this later in the episode. But while walking through the walls, Bob realizes that he can actually get down to the restaurant from the crawl space. Excited about this discovery, he stays hidden inside the walls and tries to guide the kids to do his work for him. At one point, Bob manages to reach his hand out of a vent and hand Gene his can of pee, much to Gene's disgust.
Brother,
Meanwhile, Linda decides that Bob has been stuck in the wall for too long, so she calls Teddy the handyman to get him out. Bob, of course, doesn't want that to happen. He begs Linda not to call Teddy because, you know, he talks too much.
You know how Teddy is. Talky Teddy, yap, yap, yap.
But unsurprisingly, she doesn't listen. God damn it! When Teddy arrives, he immediately starts rambling about crawl spaces, why they exist, what they're for, and a bunch of other things that Bob doesn't really care about. Bob, still determined to stay hidden until his in-laws leave, tells Teddy to come back another time to get him out. That's when Teddy starts telling the story about a guy who hid inside the walls to escape the cops. He ended up going crazy from being stuck in there for too long. Foreshadowing. Bob, still hiding in the crawl space, decides to start filming himself. He borrows Gene's camera and Luis's Coochie Copy night light to set up his little recording space. But just as he's getting comfortable, he hears something that no one in the house ever wants to hear. Linda's parents having sex.
oh my god, I think Linda's parents are having sex.
And to make it even worse, everyone in the house hears it. Trying to move past this horrifying moment, Bob actually starts enjoying his time inside the walls. He even helps Louise scare off some of her classmates, turning his hiding spot into a little fun game. Linda is actually the one taking care of the restaurant and the kids. She lets Bob know how much work she's doing without him, but he just shrugs it off, happy to stay hidden. At first, avoiding problems might seem like a good idea. Everything feels okay, and you might even be happy because you're not dealing with anything difficult. It seems almost like if you're getting a break or keeping things peaceful by not facing the problem. But over time, those problems don't go away. They just keep getting bigger and bigger. It's like when you don't clean your room right away. At first, it's no big deal, but after a few days, the mess gets worse and harder to ignore. Eventually, you'll have to deal with it. And by then, the problem might have been a lot bigger than it would have been if you had just taken care of it from the beginning. But then out of nowhere, Gloria, Linda's mom, comes out of the bathroom and starts yelling at whoever was in there last, demanding they go clean it up. Bob, still in the walls, jumps in to defend his customers, but before he could go off on her, Linda warns him not to yell at her mom. And just when when Bob thinks things can't get any worse, they do. Gloria drops the worst news possible. She and her husband have decided to stay a few more days or even as long as they need to, since Linda clearly needs extra help with the restaurant and the kids. Bob is horrified. Then Gene walks in casually announcing that he got a detention, and it's Bob's fault.
What?
Frustrated, Linda turns to her mom and says, "You could stay as long as you need to." But Bob immediately panics and now is determined to escape. So Bob tries climbing out of the same way he got in. He figures it should be easy since he was only pretending to be stuck, but the second he starts crawling back, he realizes something terrifying. He's actually stuck. Now genuinely panicking, Bob calls out to Linda admitting that he can't get out. And that's when Linda finally realizes he was never stuck in the first place. He had been faking it this whole time. Linda is furious. So when Teddy calls in to check in, she tells him not to come over because Bob doesn't need any help. But now Bob is desperate to get out, like really desperate. So it's now Bob's third day inside the crawl space and he's completely falling apart. His beard is scruffy and patchy, his eyes are tired and droopy, and he just looks miserable. He sits alone on the floor talking to Luis's Coochie Copy nightlight like it's his only friend. But things get even weirder. As Bob walks through the walls, he suddenly comes across this big door. Thinking he's finally found a way out, he steps inside only to discover something completely bizarre. Coochie Copy is now a bartender, casually chatting with Bob. He sits down, fully convinced this is real, but then when we see what's actually happening, Bob is just lying on the floor staring at nothing. At this point, there's no denying it. Bob has officially lost his mind. And to think, all of this just to avoid his in-laws for a few days. Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, Gloria decides to make a new burger of the day called the Toonami, a tuna burger. Linda, probably just too tired to argue, writes it on the board as the official burger of the day. But in Bob's hallucination, Coochie Copy suddenly warns him about this, and Bob immediately freaks out. Now at the walls of the restaurant, Bob starts yelling at customers, telling them the tuna burger is full of mercury and poison. People stop eating it, and Bob starts laughing like a maniac from inside the walls. Linda tells him to knock it off, but instead of listening, he mocks her in a silly voice, pretending like it's Coochie Copy talking instead of him. That's when Gloria turns to Linda and says what's been obvious for a while now. Bob is going crazy in there. Linda, now completely fed up, orders Bob to get out. But Bob, fully unhinged, just starts screaming,
Am I here? Or am I here? Bob! I'm everywhere!
That's it. Gloria has had enough. She announces that she's calling the fire department to come get Bob out of the walls, whether he likes it or not. While Bob is busy losing his mind inside the crawl space, something much bigger is happening in the background. His absence is negatively affecting his kids in ways he never expected. At first, it might have seemed like a harmless joke, pretending to be stuck just to avoid his in-laws, but the longer he stayed hidden, the more it started to impact his family, especially his kids. First, Gene's grades are suffering. Without Bob around, Gene has been struggling.
Nice rhymes, man.
He completely flunked his history assignment, probably because he was too distracted by everything going on at home. As a result, he got detention, something he immediately blamed on Bob. 2, Luis is messing around with the guidance counselor.
What the fuck?
Pause, not like that. Luis, never one to miss an opportunity for chaos, has been convincing the school's guidance counselor that Bob is dead. She plays up the role of a kid in mourning, making it seem like she and her siblings are in desperate need of therapy. What probably started as a joke is now spiraling into something serious. If the school really believes her, it could turn into a huge mess for the family. 3, Tina is following Bob's footsteps, quite literally. Out of everyone, Tina might be taking Bob's behavior the most to heart. Inspired by his decision to crawl into the walls, she's now doing the same exact thing, but for a very different reason. She's spying on boys by crawling through the ceiling at school. This is obviously a terrible idea, but in Tina's mind, she's just following her dad's lead. So sometimes the things that you do don't just affect you, they affect the people around you. Bob thought staying in the walls was just a personal choice, a way to escape for a little while. But in reality, it's had real consequences for his family. His son is failing, his daughter is lying to a school counselor, and his oldest child is sneaking through the ceiling to spy on boys. And the worst part, Bob has no idea. What started as a simple way to avoid his in-laws has now spiraled into a much bigger problem. So the school guidance counselor decides that because of everything Luis has been saying, a home visit is necessary. So he arrives at their house with the kids and sits down to talk with Linda. She quickly clears things up, telling him that Bob is not actually dead. The counselor is shocked. Now Linda is trying to lighten the mood by offering him a burger, but he just shakes his head no and says that he doesn't eat meat. Then out of nowhere, Bob whispers in his Coochie Copy voice saying, "Kill him." Immediately after, Bob snaps at himself in his normal voice and says, "Shut up, Coochie." No, he's actually going insane in there. The counselor just stares completely confused. Meanwhile, this just adds to the absolute insanity happening inside of Bob's head. He's been in the walls for so long that he's now arguing with himself. And worse, doing it out loud. The fire department finally breaks through the wall and Bob refuses to leave. He's not ready to face his problems just yet. After a while, Gloria, Linda's mom, decides to make some food for Bob and heads into the crawl space to find him. Bob hears her coughing and realizes that she's inside the walls with him. He starts to freak out and Gloria starts following him. Bob keeps running and screaming, trying to get away from her. Eventually, Gloria smashes through the wall and pulls Bob out with her. At the same time, Mr. Frond, the school counselor, is threatening to call CPS. He's upset about everything that's happening with the kids and their family. But once Bob finally gets out of the wall, goes to the restroom, he comes out and apologizes to everyone. He admits that he was being selfish by avoiding his problems and he should have dealt with things instead of hiding. But things aren't over just yet. Mr. Frond tries to call social services again, but Gloria steps in and threatens to report him for taking the kids out of school without permission. She tells him that he can't criticize their family if he doesn't even have one of his own. Finally, they kick Mr. Frond out of the house. Bob thanks Gloria for helping him out, but she and her husband quickly leave, ending the episode. Well, not before Luis and Bob argue over who gets to keep the Coochie Copy nightlight. The lesson here is simple. If you keep avoiding your problems, they don't just go away. They stick around and get bigger. It's better to face them head on and deal with them before they drive you crazy, just like they did to Bob in this episode. And if you don't want to end up like Bob, click this video right here.